Okay, happy Valentine's Day to you all, and welcome to APAC Japan Program's Winter Speaker Series. 皆さん、どうも、こんにちは。本日は、スタンフォード大学アジア太平洋研究セ
Good
ンターで
afternoon and welcome to the APRAC Japan Program's Winter Speaker Series. Thank you for joining us today for the third installment of the Stanford University Asia Pacific Research Center Japan Winter Program's Winter Webinar Series, tapping the untapped human resource potential with social tech. My name is Kyoto Tsui and I'm the director of the Japan program. In this webinar series, under the theme of the future of social tech, we will focus on how our lives and society will change with the development of new technologies. For problems innovation will solve and create, I would like to focus on fields such as content business and platforms, medical technology and its practical application, work style reform and diversity, energy technology and climate change, as well as discuss how the connection between Japan and the US has generated new developments in each of these fields and what we can expect from their cooperation in the future. The first two webinars have been uploaded on our APRAC YouTube channel, so if you have time, please take a look. For the third session today, we will be joined by panelists who continue to take on new initiatives in Japan and the US through utilizing various innovations along with their deep knowledge in human resource utilization and work styles in the new era to have a discussion on how we can use new technologies to effectively utilize our diverse and dormant human resources as the globalization of human resource continues. For our moderator today, we have Mr. Yasumasa Yamamoto, who is the visiting professor at the Kyoto University. Professor Yamamoto has worked at the forefront of finance and IT at Mitsubishi UFJ Bank and Google. He is also an active VC investor and continues to actively communicate through various media channels such as Nikkei and also Shimbun and business books. Here, I would like to turn the mic over to Professor Yamamoto. Over to you. Hello. Thank you for the kind introductions. My name is Yamamoto. So today, I would like to introduce to you our panelists today utilizing some slides. So please share the slides. Thank you. So the first slide is about myself. As I have just been introduced, this is me. Next, I would like to introduce, Professor Kojima first. This is Professor Kojima. So I was able to meet him at Harvard. He is a wonderful economist. And he has become a tenure professor at a very young age, and he has received much attention. So I would like to ask Professor Kojima to briefly introduce himself. Thank you. My name is Kojima, as I was just introduced. I am an economist, I'm an academic. I specialize in matching theory and market design. I hope to be able to talk a little bit about this. As you can see in my bio, I was in Japan until I graduated from university, and for about 17 years, I was in the US. I was there for a postdoc and I was still also teaching. And as you can see here, I was a professor at Stanford from 2009 to 2020. And you see my picture here, you're wondering why I'm smiling so much. So when I was leaving Stanford, my coworkers have been able to write nice message on this T-shirt. And I believe this is a T-shirt that is sold at the Stanford bookstore, and it says here Tokyo here. I think it's a direct translation of something that was written in Japanese, I believe. And I would like to also ask everybody who goes by or to Stanford to buy this T-shirt. Very excited to be here. Thank you. Let me move on to the next slide. So this is Ms. Nakazawa. So she is a founder. And I was able to meet her in New York. and she used to work for Sony, a major company. She has also studied abroad and she has started business. So can you introduce yourself? My name is Nakazawa. Nice to meet you. I am running a company by the name Dearest. As Mr. Yamamoto has mentioned, I used to work for Sony. I was there for 11 years. And after that, I went to study at Stanford and I moved to New York. I started my first company there. I failed, and then I started a next company, which is Dearest. Dearest is a company that provides supporting system for working parents, provides childcare, top tier education. It is something that can be provided as a benefits program for parents. Nice to meet you. So now I like to ask more questions and have more conversations with the panelists. So, Ms. Naka, as I understand that you have a very diverse program, diverse experience. You were raised in Hong Kong and Singapore. Yes, that is true. I was in those two countries and I came back to Japan and I worked for Sony. Oh, sorry, I went to college and then I was employed at Sony. So you have this experience in Asia and then you decide to study abroad to the US and specifically Stanford. So what caused that? Initially, I wasn't really thinking too much about studying abroad, but I was able to get assigned to South Korea when I was working for Sony, and I was responsible for the business department. From there, I was able to get hands-on experiments in business management, and I was still in my 20s, and I was the first person, as a woman, as a person in their 20s, youngest person to be responsible. And my boss at the time told me, just because I make a mistake doesn't mean that Tony is going to go out of business. So I was really encouraged by this, and I was able to deliver results. And at Sony, once a year, there's a study abroad program where one person out of the whole company is chosen, and I was chosen. And it was a lot of trial and error when I first started managing. And I was able to learn in a more structured fashion at Stanford. So when you think about the before and after you went to Stanford, do you feel any difference? I do. Initially, I was thinking about becoming a person to be able to support Sony. That was what I thought before I went to Stanford. But when I went to Stanford, there was many unexpected things that happened, and I was really taught about changing the world. And there's a lot of people who hold this mission to be able to change our world, to tackle on societal issues, to come up with solutions, to be able to create something that doesn't exist in the world from scratch. Or so many people like that around me. And I was able to learn, study with those people. And when I noticed, I was also thinking myself about starting something of my own to be able to create an impact for society. And people say you catch the startup bug when you study at Stanford, but I think I caught that bug too. That's great. When it comes to starting business, I think it's infectious. You catch on the heat, and I think you were directly impacted by that. I was able to feel that when I heard your story right now. So you were in New York and you started your business there. Is there a reason why you chose New York? After I graduated from Stanford, I was assigned to the New York office from Sony, so I was worked on brand marketing and also was responsible for some of the ed tech accounts. So I just stayed in New York and then I started my own business. And Stanford's ecosystem also existed in New York. So I thought New York was a great location for me to start my business. Also, there's a startup lab in Colombia. I also belong to that group, and that is how I was able to start my first company. And currently, you are in Japan. You started a business in Japan, is that right? Yes. So I have this company, Dearest, and it's been 5 years since I started this company. I believe we have been able to grow and we have been able to have some impact. And my husband had to move back to Japan due to his work. So I am able to be involved with my US company, even from Japan remotely, and I have my team in the US, but I'm also thinking about doing something impactful for Japan too. In the US, I have my colleague from Stanford, Jessica Wertheim, and she is my partner in running DEARIS, so she's there. So I can see that you have a lot of connections from Stanford. Yes. Great. Next, I would like to turn to Professor Kojima asking more questions. So market design is, I know you said this in your introduction, so let me ask. For business persons, for various people, I think market design is something foreign. So would you be able to give us a simple explanation as to what this is? Sure, market design is related to computer science, operation research, economics, applied mathematics. So this is an academic field. Just explain what it is. So when you look at the market or within the society, it is something that helps to design a structure that is going to be useful for society. For example, in the slide, you can see this right now. So this is a center we have, the Market Design Center. For example, we have the entrance exam, which is a scheme that exists in Japan, in the US, and other countries. And it's really about how can we have students pass their entrance exams? How do we select students? If you are able to create this system in a smart way, everybody is able to be happy. But if it doesn't go well, a lot of people are going to be unhappy. For example, in Japan, if you can look at the picture on the right side, you may be able to see this. So when you look at the entrance exams for public high schools, there is some unfair situations taking place between female students and male students. And when we have these issues, the question is, how can we change our system? How can we make it more fair? And this is all about creating this scheme using some economic principles. I hope that answers your question. So this is a very academic research. I mean, I'm sure there's mathematics involved and statistics involved. But let me ask you, so Professor, I'm sure you love mathematics, and that is why you decided to join or enter University of Tokyo. Was there anything that caused you to make this decision? So I know it's early in the morning in Japan, but people who can do mathematics, there's actually a lot of people. I actually like mathematics, so I find it really interesting and fun for me to be solving problems. But if it's just solving problems, then I thought, you can't really do that much to do good. But when I went to university, I think there was a lot of people who were really good at it too. And I thought to myself, so this is related to what I specialize, matching theory. So the skills I have, the interests I have, I was thinking, how can I direct that? How can I set it up in a very smart way? For example, I like mathematics. I'm pretty good, but I wouldn't say I'm the best. So the question is, how can I still be able to utilize my strength in mathematics, especially in economics and what I study? I think policies or systems are, in a sense, algorithms. So I bring that down into calculations or formulas. And mathematics is something I used to like as a hobby.
Then you can see the picture here. So all these new systems, I wanted to brush them up and then polish them. And then that's the realization that I actually had more recently. But I encountered economic study, and I thought that was really interesting, and I thought I was going to be able to contribute to the society. So at University of Tokyo, when you're studying at undergraduate degree, and then you move to Yale and Harvard to study and pursue your academic goals, and you're the head of the center. So this is something you've been really passionate about. Do you have like a secret to stay passionate about what you do in your career? I think it's really difficult because people's interests change over time. And when I was in up to until college study, I was more interested in science or nature related studies. But in me, I've been pursuing the similar sort of field over the past 20 years or so. So one thing is that I think is important is that you pursue something you're really interested in and you don't give it up. So I think it's really easy to say that, but if you're attending this session and you're younger, of course, it doesn't really matter. Your age doesn't really matter, but finding your passion is kind of conscious work. So for me, mathematics was the only thing I thought when I was younger. But then I realized that I could actually utilize my talent in something else. And I was looking for something that I could do using my mathematics talent for a year or two. And I took some language classes. I did some other activities. But then I started to wander around and started to take random classes. Sometimes I wanted to join this rollerblade club. So you try different things and you find out what's good for you, what's a good fit for you and your personality. And then I think through that trial and error of different things, I think you can actually narrow down what really fits you and your lifestyle. So you were influenced by the people from like a skating club, like you wrote about that story from the club activity experience, but that kind of trial and error to find your answer that influenced your career decisions. Well, it's the same for startup companies. Only 10% of all the founded startups can survive. So like Dr. Kojima said, I think you have to try different things and maybe 90% of that wouldn't pan out or work out, but you might find something in the 10%. So you didn't really stay for graduate schools in Tokyo University of Tokyo, but you went to the States. Yes, that was sort of like a natural course event. So I didn't really know when I was in undergraduate, but I just realized at graduate school level, everyone told me that you have to go and study abroad and go study in the States and go to graduate school in the States. And all the professors told me that too. So I remember this interview. And the interviewers asked me like, okay, so Kojima-san, like, why are you not thinking about studying abroad? So that was eye-opener that made me realize that, okay, I have to study abroad and do something outside Japan, so especially Stanford. A lot of people come and study here at Stanford. And for me, I saw a lot of people with a strong mission to do something to change the society at Stanford. So there's this special mindset that you observe at Stanford. So that was a really positive impact on my life. So at Harvard, you had a really famous professor, I mean, and then I think it seems like you have a really good matching, like to meet great people in your life. Are they all by accident, or do you think you have when you meet somebody, you're sort of on that wave to meet people in his network? So this Professor Alos, like Yasumoto-san mentioned now, he's a very famous professor, but I didn't know anything about this person because there are so many other famous professors there. But really prestigious schools like Harvard, there's a lot of people doing really interesting projects. So when I went to Harvard, the foundational economics and game theory and mathematical theory was something I wanted to pursue. And then as I became to realize, okay, that doesn't sound very interesting anymore. And then one class I randomly took was talking about marketing design and system design and matching theory. And then that was the realization that I had through this one class. So I think things you like actually change over time. And then your interest might change too. And then you need to have that mindset that's flexible enough to actually go with that. So I think that was a really good experience for me to discover that. So West Coast and East Coast, I think Stanford is the place for famous professors. But do you have like a different way of communicating or networking with people comparing West and East Coasts in the States? Seems like connection got cut off.
Hmm. 落ちるにしてもちょっと時間が長いの。あ、落ちましたね。で、また戻られると思うので、お待ちください。すぐ入られるかと思います。
Okay, so he needs to log out and hopefully he'll log back in. Okay, so let's move on to Ms. Nakazawa. Okay, so I talked about Dearest a little bit earlier, but I'd like to share the background, how I started this company. So I was stationed in New York when I was working for Sony, and I started one company and that didn't work out, and I was really frustrated with myself. That was a dining company that you founded? So why do you think it didn't work out? Well, there are several reasons. But I actually wanted to start a company to start a company. And then I was actually aiming to solve some issues in the dining industry. But unless you have a mission, really strong personal mission, it's really hard to continue. And then you have to take the issue as your own because it's a really long, continuous race, endurance. So while I was working on the first company, I gave birth to my first child. And I needed to outsource child rearing, but the cost was really high and there was no system that I was able to use. So then I realized that I have to have a system. We have to have a system where we don't have to feel guilty about outsourcing child rearing, and the system that can provide high quality education and childcare for our children. So that was something. I think the difference between my first and the second companies were like I had this strong mission to really solve the issue. So I think it's really best case scenario if you can actually move on to something that you have strong passion for. But do you have any learning or lessons from the first failure? Yes, most of the things I didn't really know until I actually started doing it. So I think trying it is the first step for everything. especially from a large company. I think it's some people might feel hesitant to really start a company after leaving a prestigious large company. What was the trigger point? So there were so many different fun projects in Sony, and I was actually thinking that I could maybe continue working for Sony, but here looks like Dr. Kojima's back.
ロス先生がいらっしゃってというところと、東と日本、西の
We were talking about the difference between West Coast and the East Coast. My apologies, I am back. So yes, East and West, yes, they're really good people that I met at both locations. Two things. So Stanford is very unique in many ways. But its connections with Silicon Valley and the distance is very close to startup IT-related field. But one commonality between two areas was that the talent network and talent communications was really active. So my professor Ross that I mentioned earlier, so after I got a job, he moved to Stanford after 2-3 years. I got a job. So I think he's probably the authority in the market design. And I think the hub was at Harvard, but then he moved to Stanford after I moved to Stanford. So I think what's important, of course, there are some differences, but the networking and alumni network is really interesting. And I think that's one of the most important key part. So I have a question. So here we have a Q&A section here. And if I see interesting questions, I can actually pick out some questions and ask the panelists. So this is a question for Dr. Kojima. So as one of the algorithm consideration for matching, personal or psychological factors, for instance, RIASEC, RIASEC, I don't know what it is. Do you consider that? I don't really know what this abbreviation means, but I think that the foundation is that in a social matching setting. So personal needs, individual needs. Let's take entrance exam, and then you take high score, and then this person can go to the school with the highest level. But you still have to consider the area they live or the interests. And then I don't know if you can call it a psychology, individual psychology, but we have individual needs and wants. So we want to realize that.
So each of these people have their preferences and they act upon it. And when you make adjustments, so this is where it gets difficult to come up with a system, but also makes it very interesting. And this is where game theory comes into play. With game theory, you have to also look at yourself, but you also have other people, and you just focus on your sides and you try to handle and kind of adjust yourselves depending on how the other people go about themselves. And this is where you use this theory and you come up with calculations and also with these logics. But in some situations, it doesn't, standard theories don't incorporate psychological biases, but in many cases, these theories don't work as you expect it to. For example, when you use it for schools entrance examples, you ask everybody to write what they want, what they desire, but some people are able to write it because some people don't know what they want to do, what path they want to pursue. So we have those kind of situations. So the question is, how can we have people or students be able to write down what they want to be able to pursue? So that is where we need to have the teachers come into play. And I think in those situations, we need to make psychological considerations. Understood. So this is something I also want to ask you. When you think about life and if there is something you want to do and you make that decision, so there are some things you're good at, something you like to do, and something that's marketable. So this is something that always gets argued. In your case, Professor Kojima, you like mathematics and you're very, very good at economics. And I think you also had to look at potential, or did you consider your potential when you decided on your research or pursued your studies? I think that it depends on the time too. In the beginning, I simply thought about, what can I do? I think what I want to research on might be helpful for society. But I think it was more about myself having fun. Because the thing is, if you're not having fun, you're not going to be able to continue. And I really truly feel that. And when you think about the impact to society or whether it's going to be useful to society, I thought, again, I think this depends on what you're working on. For me, that aspect of whether it's useful to society also made my topic very interesting. I just mentioned game theory, and there's all these economic theories. And when you actually try to come up with a specific, realistic system, I think it was actually coming into fruition, and those systems were actually used in reality when I was studying in grad school. As I mentioned, I have Professor Roth. There was also other students in and also New York. I'm sure Ms. Nakazawa was there too. And there was this high school entrance exams. There was a lot of panic and confusion taking place. There's about 100,000 students who go into the public high schools, but for some reason, there are about 30,000 students who are not able to get into the school they wanted. So I looked at the market design. I used a theory to see how will we to resolve this. So we were able to reduce 90% on the number of people who weren't able to get into the school they wanted. And that was very amazing. So there were a lot of things that people were not satisfied about with the school, but there were many improvements done. And there were many, many examples taking place. So if you really put in the time and do the research, you are able to actually make an impact to society. I also think it has to do with timing. Exactly. Currently, we had COVID, and it has a huge impact on our lives. And because of it, I think there are many societal issues. But with that, I think it may accelerate more studies and in academia. Do you agree with that? Yes, I agree with that. With COVID, on this topic, many things has changed, especially in the research field. We also see a change. I think there are new studies taking place. One big example would be this. You might have heard this. So some epidemiology and economics, so a combination between the two fields. For example, when we have something like a lockdown, how much impact do we get on our economy? And also from an epidemiology perspective, how much impact do we get or effect can we expect from having lockdown? So I think there are many studies taking place because of COVID. So I used to also study on public safety, and there are statistics, and I think there are many things that are getting studied. And when you look at the process, especially with COVID right now, we see a lot of integration between many different fields. And also relate to this topic, with COVID, I think how we work has changed. I think this is a great example of webinar too. I don't think we used to have that many webinars before. Do you think market design has had a lot of impact or will be having more impact? Do you feel that yourself? I think there are many issues, old issues that we had before, and they remain important. But with COVID, I think we now have more attention to those issues. So work is important, but our personal lives is also important. And I think this also has to do with taking care of children. So because of remote work, the nurseries or kindergartens are not open. But the parents have to somehow figure out a way to be able to work and also be able to take care of their children. And I think this has to do with work-life balance, which I think we are all familiar with. And I think there's now more attention that spotlights on work-life balance. And I think it's very related to organizations and HR. Some traditional Japanese companies might have been like, starting tomorrow, you'll be going to an island and you will have to be working there for 3 years. But I think now we have many people who aren't going to be able to do that. And when we force people or put them into a situation where they have to take on assignments they can do, I think that also creates a problem on people leaving companies. Which is why there needs to be a good balance between valuing the company's mission, but also be able to make it flexible for people working in the company. So there needs to be a balance. And this is not a new issue. This is an issue that has existed before, which is why I have also been studying market design to be able to provide a solution. But now I think this issue has become more important. There's now blockchain, there's DAO, we have this decentralized organization right now. What about people belonging in companies, working for a company? Is there a meaning to it now? Like, for example, maybe there's a way where people can still work without having their bosses supervising you. And if there's some kind of way we can have transparency and we're able to pay people money without having the supervision, do you think that is possible? Do you think that kind of change can take place? Honestly, I don't know. When you think about the traditional economic theories, we have to ask ourselves, why do we even have organization? Because everything should be taken in the market. Can it not be handled by the market? That is a question. I think in the 20th century, there was this kind of discussions. I think there were many researchers on this, and one person said that there is a reason to why we have organizations. So there is some kind of transaction, and because of this transaction, it's sometimes difficult to do, and that's why it's easier to have an organization where somebody or some entities are giving directions. And what Professor Yamamoto, what you said is very interesting. In other words, there's a lot of cost, and if that cost goes down, then maybe there is no need to be able to have an organization. Then maybe we don't need to have a command and control. And if that situation takes, I think the paradigm is going to change. So in the past, there was lifetime employment. Many companies were providing that. So once you join a company, you're able to control that individual. But now it's different. Now companies are not closed anymore. It's more open. We are also seeing that in Japanese companies, so we are seeing progress. And maybe in some situation, maybe with the use of blockchain, maybe we'll be able to make more changes. I don't know how far blockchains will be able to take us, but I think it's a potential. I think we are seeing changes in our industry. We are seeing changes in our market. I think we are seeing more expansion. I think the shapes or the realms of organizations and companies are changing. One more thing. The relationship between companies and also academia, I think that already exists in the US, but I feel that we are seeing that more in Japan too. What do you think about that? Yes. So for roughly 20 years, I was away from Japan. And towards the end of 2020, I returned to Japan, and there's something I felt. I feel that Japan has changed. And it's exactly what you said. So 20 years ago, colleges are colleges. So it's a little bit closed off from society. It's isolated. And when you go into grad school, some people say you're getting hospitalized. So a lot of people think that people who are not compatible with society will have to go into grad school to rehabilitate. But no, it's not like that. It's different. Even at the market design centers, we have companies and we have other people, other organizations. There's many opportunities to be able to collaborate with it. It's not just with us. And I think University of Tokyo is taking this very seriously. And I think I especially see this with students. I feel that their mindsets are different. These kind of collaboration is, it's a given to these students. So I think that is a change. Thank you very much. And in terms of work style changes, I would like to ask Ms. Nakazawa, do you feel any huge changes? I would also like to understand more about your business. Yes, there are many companies that are using Dearest as part of their welfare benefits program, and the purpose of Dearest is to be able to support that. And many companies want to be able to hire great talent, want to be able to retain them. And in the past, we didn't have companies that were getting this involved with their employees' personal lives. And I think it also has to do with the shapes and forms of families. It's getting very diverse. And I think the companies are now interested not only in the physical aspect, but also the mental health, the wellness of their employees. And when you want to have a good personal life, you also need to have a good balance with your work. So in a sense, work style reform, a work style needs more flexibility. It's about how you work, who you work, for what purposes. I think that will be something that will continue to be looked into. And I believe Professor Kojima mentioned about work and life balance, but we are seeing a merge between the two. And I think moving forward, I think it is going to be important. So each person's career, each person's vision, what life stage they are. And I think those elements are going to be very important in making their decisions about their future. I see. So we just received a question. To be able to make a social impact, it doesn't have to be a company. And some might argue that why can't you start an NPO? So how do you make that distinction? How do you make that decision? What are your thoughts between starting your business versus an NPO? Of course, NPOs are important and for profits are too. But for my personal background, I have been in the business world. So I was thinking about how can I bring more impact to business? That has been something I've been thinking about. In other words, for NPO, I don't have the knowledge. Of course, with NPOs, you have to be able to do fundraising, you have to make it sustainable, but I don't have any experience or knowledge. And for that reason, I think I was leaning towards more on the business side. I wanted to do my business, but I also wanted to run a sustainable business. And with that, I also wanted to be doing something impactful to society, and that was something very attractive to me. That was the reason why I chose for profit. Understood. Thank you. So, Professor Kojima, how do you decide on something that should be done on the academia side versus something that should be taken care of or pursued on the business side? That's a very interesting question. That is something I myself is also trying to find answer. So recently with universities, I think we tell students that we need to be able to find ourselves, to be able to sustain ourselves, to be able to fund ourselves. But in principle, in universities, compared to private sectors, I think they have a strength. So there might be some research that's not going to come into fruition immediately. Maybe that's not the right way of saying it, but by doing these researches, not all things may exclusively result into profits, but there are researches that's going to be a good for the world. So for the public good. I think those things are something great to be handled and researched within academia. And with public spaces, I think we can really say that I'm not just talking about parks made by the government, but I think there are some things that many people or the public will be able to enjoy. Since if you were to come up with a good idea and if you're not able to get a patent, that's a problem, right? I think that's a good example.
But these kind of a profit or the products are not going to be very profitable. But those really public goods, good investment. If it's not profitable for the company, they don't really want to do that unless they're very lucrative. So I think that's the benefit of working as a researcher in the academia. But I kind of mentioned this earlier, but universities, colleges, so maybe in the long term, they provide something for the future. And that's what I heard because it was said so often. But maybe in recent years, I don't really necessarily agree with that distinction between academia and private sector. So as a member of academia, I talk to a private sector company. And then sometimes they talk about projects that's going to be profitable in a year or two. But then we sometimes talk about future in 10 years and 20 years. And so sometimes a company think about the future that's 100 years after we die. So I'm recently discovering that maybe the private sector is a good place to think about long-term future.
そういった中でなんて言いますか、企業であるとか大学もそうなんですけど、グローバル
So those companies and universities, they're going through globalization, especially in the field such as mobility. And Dr. Kojima as well, Ms. Nakazawa, you go back and forth between two cultures, two countries.
中田さんの方ですかね。ありますかね。
And do you have any comments on that?
起業されているところも、もともとグローバルから始まっているという。
So I think you start from global point of view. Yes, I'm working on a new project in Japan. And let me first talk about that first. So when we think about the Japanese society, I think it's really important that we educate our children how to use money and how to understand the value of money. So I think it's really valuable to teach and train our kids to think that way. And then this company has a very clear mission. And then we have to think about what to do, that's important, but who to do it with, that's even more important item. So I've been collecting team members to do those, to fulfill this mission. And one precondition is that they all agree with this mission. And also they're talented. So I have to find a tech superstar, and if they're going to work on contents, we have to find somebody who knows global content. But like when we find these people, some of them are in Canada or in UK, in Japan. So they're all in different countries. And then it's like a remote company. And then because of that, we have access to really excellent talent. But because of COVID, maybe I've been kind of working remotely and I moved to the States and I'm operating my company from Japan, the company in the States from Japan. But through this experience, I'm really glad that I had this opportunity to get this done. So you communicate with people and professors overseas, but because of COVID, do you think joint research has made a progress? I think it's really interesting to think that way. So when I first decided to come back to Japan, that was before, a little bit before COVID actually hit. And then after I decided, about 3 months after I decided to come back, COVID got really way worse. But I think for economics, I think US is the hub, and Japan, I was really worried and concerned if I go back to Japan, I might actually stay away from the front line of this the field. But because of the COVID, I think that kind of distance or my concern was mitigated. So we have a seminar I think we have a weekly seminar at Tokyo University of Tokyo, and other university hold those regular seminars. But it was really expensive to invite speakers from overseas because it was expensive and the logistics was too complicated. But now we can invite anyone from any place. So I have small children, 2 small children, and it was really difficult to go somewhere and then give a talk. But now, right now, I can just get up in the morning or in the middle of the night to join these sessions online. So I think that's really good. But when you look at the society as a whole, I don't know if the system is working for everyone in the society. I don't know. I think we still have a lot of challenges and issues. But for us, for academia, I'm a little over 40. But for my generation, we have researchers network and holding a remote companies and seminars. That's really good. But younger students, they are going to meet someone to have a good match for their career. So I'm actually making a tough time having them connect with each other, connect with people in their career. So to build a good relations and have an informal network or relationship with other people, I think it's there still are challenges. So if you already have a foundation or a network, then we can overcome geographic limitations and restrictions to meet and enhance your network. I think that's your main point. Okay, so I have one question here. Dr. Kojima went back to Japan. What kind of factors do we need in order to retain or discover global talents in Japan? So to be really honest with you, high salary, of course. So in the States and Japan, I think that the researchers get paid maybe 3 to 4 times more in the States compared to what we get paid in Japan. So I have 2 little children, and it costs a lot of money to sustain a family. So that's the wage difference. And then also flexibility for talent recruitment and retention. That's another thing Japan needs to address. And also, when you have a lot of attractive talents, interesting talents in one place, that in itself becomes very attractive to more interesting, talented people to get into that place or organization. So in the States, I think the US has been the backwater in the field of research. But with the in the early 20s, after the Nazi, I think the field of research actually moved to Europe, and then now we have MIT and Stanford and Harvard as the research hub. Nowadays, again, so top working a talent, I think it's tremendously beneficial to work with these talents in your career. So sometimes they're in your local area, sometimes they're not. But I think it's really important that you can actually have access to that kind of network of great talents. So meeting with these great talents, I think it's like the key for your success. So in Japan, we started talking about diversity. So diversity is to make us stronger. It seems like one of the essential factors. And then I think it's going to change in Japan. So how can we ensure diversity and inclusion in Japan, right? Like Mr. Yamamoto just said, I think it's going to be critical, just absolutely inevitable to have diversity for your company. For instance, my own company. So in the States, we have different ethnicity, beliefs, philosophies, and in order to provide services that are approachable, accessible for all these people, I don't think we can survive as a company. So that location of people and personalities and everyone in the team, we're all different. But we actually have people in late 30s and close to 40s. So we understand older people, but we don't really have experiences dealing with teenagers or understanding teenagers. So we need to have somebody younger. So we have to have age diversity as well, not only gender and ethnicity. And we also have to be considerate about the male and female diversity. So we have to have a team that's reflecting the social diversity that we're aiming to sell our services and products. So the solution in Japan is really, really a big issue to tackle. So the preschool matching issue, we have that in Japan. So I think we need to have a multitude of applications or countermeasures in order to address diversity in Japan. So in order to increase diversity, what can we possibly do in terms of market design? So there are things we can do and then things that are difficult to do. So for instance, if you talk about preschool, of course, there are different opinions and viewpoints on this, but one goal is to address women's work situation. So of course, preschool is not only for women, but currently, most kids are raised by or taken care of by moms or mothers or working women. So we have to secure that child care in order to have equal access to work possibilities and career possibilities for men and women. So one of my projects is that when we have preschool with a set number of children in each class, we use matching algorithm to have more parents being able to have a seat with the conditions that they want. And then also not only preschool. So when we were talking about high schools in New York, there's always an issue that the rich kids or smart kids go to good schools. And especially it's really obvious in the States. And then there's also ethnic issues, ethnicity or racial issues. So good students, Asian students go to good schools and not so good schools. Some African American students go to those schools, and then those disparities, social disparities, need to be addressed. So we have in Japan we have allocation for female students, male students. So maybe some kind of system. Maybe we don't have to use the racial diversity, but maybe we can use those zip code. We can divide the school number of seats depending on where you live.
Because there was some quota decided, there were some issues where Asian students were not allowed to enter. So when we have this kind of system or we have some kind of quota, maybe there is a system where we'll be able to reduce the number of people who are not able to get in because of these quotas or these systems. But there's a way. To give you an example, So we have African Americans. We wanted to have a lot more African American students to get in. But for that reason, we decided to be very strict on the number of Asian students that can come in. But in reality, we wanted to have more African Americans students to come in, but they didn't enter. And also in India, there's also the case system. And maybe we have this intention to have some group come in, but then they weren't able to come in. So we have this spaces open. Today's webinar's theme is social tech. There are ways where we would use social tech to be able to come with solutions. And I think there are many people who are tackling these issues. So speaking to what you said, there's computer science and there are many other fields that are coming up with solutions or to the problems we have. Yes, and in the case of US and Japan, maybe Japan is a little bit behind, but we do have some restrictions to the number of how many students can get into certain fields, but we are lacking some students. And maybe but we have a lot of students actually going into manufacturing. But maybe this is because we have more professors in this field. Do you think this will be changing in the future? So I don't know how much I can talk about here, but just as a general comment, I think that's a very important point. What I can say is that I know there are various reasons, but I think there are some obstacles due to the fact that there are some rigid policies or systems. So I think something needs to be changed. As Professor Yamamoto, you mentioned, it's reality that there's not going to be a silver bullet to be able to solve all the problems. So also considering that point, I think we have the older generation that are leaving their positions. I think that is taking place right now. And at times like this, I think it makes it easier to make some changes, so to reform. So if we have time, we should do this. We should make changes. Even in my university, when a professor or teacher leaves, we have new teacher faculty come in. And in those timings, we have people who are doing innovative things, new things come in. So I do see it as an opportunity. So I think we have to be smart and be able to seize those kinds of opportunities. I have to ask a question to Ms. Nakazawa. Just want to understand the difference between the Japan and the US in the use of technology, overcoming barriers. So Ms. Nakazawa, you were formerly working for Sony and now you are focusing on education. So you have shifted your focus. What do you think about Japan? I don't think you have that much obstacles within the US, but how about in Japan? I think the mentality against risk is very different. How we're educated about risk is different. I think in the US, even since you're a child, you're educated to take on risk, and growth is very important. Even looking at my son, even if he goes to preschool, taking on challenges, challenging themselves is celebrated. So it's different. Taking on challenges, challenging oneself is seen as something positive. On the contrast, in Japan, you have to be very strict with yourself, but you also have to be strict with the other people. So if you're going to try something new, there is no failure. You have to be responsible. So I think that's how taking on challenges is seen in Japan. And because of that, I think some people are hesitant in taking on new challenges or trying new things. I think that's a very interesting point. This is something that came to my mind. Even within economics, risk is something scary. For example, would you like to put in all the money, all the wealth you have? Maybe you have a 50-50 chance. Maybe you can double the fortune you have or you lose everything. So I think a lot of people are hesitant in doing that. But I think this is a commonly known bias. I think we make a mistake. We tend to see a huge risk, a small risk as the same thing. There's a bias. So let's say your whole wealth, everything you own. Normally, you don't want to do a 50-50 bet where you can lose everything. Maybe, of course, if it's a 50-50 chance that you can double what you have, that might be something you might be interested. But when you place a bid, maybe it's 51%, that's 200 yen, and then 49% chance maybe it's going to be 0 and you lose everything. But if you're given the opportunity to do this 10,000 times, you should take it because it's the matter of probability. You will be able to win something. So that's a risk that you should be taking. But there's a situation where people tend to see any risk, big or small, as a risk. So when you look at things in such a narrow scope, that might be a problem. You need to kind of take a step back and be able to have a more holistic view of what you're facing. When you study statistics, you're able to look at error or mistake. You have to think about, is this by a coincidence or is there some kind of logic? Is there a cause and effect to this? It really has to do with the size of the sample. And you need to be able to have enough samples to be able to have discussions. You also have to kind of question and examine and see if it's designed in a correct way. In a case of reality, you don't have that many samples, so I think you tend to get biased and you look at things in a skewed manner. So we have about roughly 10 minutes left. I think we need to move on to summarizing what we have discussed. Today I have been able to ask a lot of questions to both of you. We were able to get a global perspective, perspectives from the US, perspectives from Japan. And let's just think about Japan. You had been away from Japan for 10 years, and I think you felt some differences. So I want to understand. Now we have COVID-19, we had a pandemic, and the world has gone through a significant change. And unfortunately, we are in an isolated situation in Japan. Not many foreigners are able to enter the country. But when we have this kind of significant change, I think there are market changes, new studies are taking place. And when you look at Japan, I think Japan is trying to open its door. I think that's taking place within the private sector and also within academia. And hopefully, there are more opportunities to have more collaborations with students from overseas. So I want to ask both Ms. Nakazawa and Professor Kojima in the last 5 minutes if there's anything you want to share as your last comment. Just one word. I really want to be able to have more overseas students. I feel bad for them. I also feel bad for the postdoctorate students who need to do the studies. We really want to have them come in. And I'm very serious about this. And I'm not just talking about myself, but I think we need to be able to think about this. And I think it has to do with our theme. When you think about global, regardless of like whether it's good or not, I think this is something that is absolutely necessary. Ideas are extremely environment, it's important for our society, for economics, and you need to think about where are these good ideas. It doesn't all just exist in Japan. That's not the case. So if we isolate ourselves, that's going to be a huge cost for us. That is going to cost us. Sorry, I wanted to keep it short, but that's what I wanted to say. What about you, Ms. Nakazawa? Oh, before that, we have a question for you. So if you can take a look at the Q&A. Oh, sorry, let me share that in the chat.
I heard from friends that Japanese men do not do household chores and women are expected to manage homeworks and balance career. Is that true? If yes, how do we help women employees continue at workplace? Do you have any social tech startups that work in this domain? はい。日本の男性は
Yes, Japanese men do not do housework chores, or it's perceived that way. And the question is this true? And also, women, for women to be able to work in society, what kind of support is needed for them? That was the question. No, this is not going to be the same across the board. I think including my fellow panelists here and my husband, I believe they are taking on housework chores. They are helping out. So I don't think it's only women who are doing all the housework, but I do think there are some gender roles. And I have heard Kotobuki Taisha, which means that women leave their companies or leave their jobs to get married, to become a housewife. And I think that's something that's very different in comparison to the US, and we can see that as a gap.
So I think there are a lot of solutions. But in order to support women, maybe sacrificing men, maybe let men do take care of their kids or their parents, elders, or they take maternity leave, childcare leaves. So I think those liberal companies, they would provide welfare to support men and women to spend more time at home. So that's one approach. And I think other aspects that we could do potentially going forward, it's really hard to come up with good examples right now, but maybe this is something that we all need to address in the future. So I don't know if I answered your question, but sorry, I would like to jump in here on this issue. I think this is a really complicated issue. So I log in at 8:30 this morning, and my wife actually took over, and I needed to apologize that she needed to take care of the little kids this morning to take them to preschool. So what I'm hopeful about is places like Tokyo. I think we have a good geological advantage compared to some places in the States. So I think it's easier in a metropolitan area like this for both of us, two people from one single household, to find a job. So my wife is also a scholar. So, so we were able to find work here. But I think when you think about Stanford, the towns around Stanford was the only place we can work at. So Tokyo has more options. So in that sense, I think we have some benefit in compact urban area. So let's say if husband and wife both can find a satisfying career path or jobs, we still lack a system to make that happen. So in the States, I think if the school wants to recruit one person, one professor, and then they always ask, what's your spouse doing, or if their husband or wife wants to do something at that school, they think about what's potentially possible for both husband and wife. But in Japan, it feels like married couples are more difficult to get hired by one organization. So at University of Tokyo, there's a movement that they might actually be able to change that going forward. But I think it's not a national movement just yet in Japan. So in the States, so there are, of course, sensitive issues to be handled. But I think in Japan, seems like husband and wife need to get a job at a different organization or different places. So it seems like that's still the trend. So if you have additional questions, please enter your questions here in the Q&A section. So for human talent, so we have this fintech company for middle-aged men and women in Japan. So if you want to sort of be part of our team, then please, sorry, I'm advertising my company, but we have an email address at hello@ikura. So that's my company address. So if you are interested in working with us, please let us know. So next one, so including market design, the implementation of research results at the early stage, it's really difficult for regular general business people or government workers to have that image, and prohibiting joint projects to move forward. So in the Market Design Center, how are you going to overcome that? Well, so far we've been really lucky that we were invited to participate in different projects. Sometimes we are too busy and we have to say no. So it's we've been really busy and unfortunate in that sense. But we would like to actually address wider audience and have more impact and have magnitude on society. But not only just our center, but when you think about market design, we would like to actually spread the words, and then events like this today, we have to actually disseminate and we have to reach more people from within. And then when we think about how we change the current situation, as a scholar, as a researcher, I think it's really important for each of us to really make what we do available for public. And then you remember Einstein, and then he was really popular, and a lot of authors actually wanted to use his photo in one of those books about his research. And then there was a criticism that he shouldn't be on books to publicize his research. So I think the situation's changing, but still, some people actually see it as sort of a hesitant, or they don't like that when a researcher goes public or be on social media. So I think one wish that I have for non-academic people, maybe like outside Ivory Tower, maybe you can discuss more about research, academic research. That's one thing. And then also sometimes there are things we can't address or we can't do because we do highly specialized research. So sometimes we are able to address an issue, but not others. So if you encounter one of us saying, oh, we can't address your issue, then you shouldn't give up, and you should contact other people and other researchers, and then keep your vision wider to find until you find somebody who can help you. So I think we are running out of time for today's session. Thank you for attending this session today. And I'm going to let Mr. Dr. Tsutsui to take the floor. He is muted. Okay, so he wants me to close the session. So with COVID, we went through a huge transition over the 2 years. But I think that change will lead to something positive. And then I hope this webinar became part of that positive change. Thank you very much for Dr. Kojima and Ms. Nakazawa for participation, for your comments today. Thank you very much.